Communism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.
End all of these wars.
America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Quest for Clarity podcast. I'm your host, Nolan. Thank you so much for being here today. Big show today. We got to go over everything that happened yesterday. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin met in Alaska. Big deal, big news coming out of yesterday. So we'll get into that. And I just want to remind you guys, please make sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube. I really appreciate it. Also, be sure to go follow me on Instagram and X for more bonus content over there, as well as follow me on Spotify for the audio version of this podcast. So thank you guys so much. Let's get right into the show. So yesterday, as we all probably know, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin met for the first time since this war in Ukraine broke out in 2022. They met in Russia on a meeting that was kind of scheduled really on the fly. This meeting has only been in the works for about a week, and they got it all done. So let's kind of get into the timeline here. So if we all remember, back about a week and a half ago, United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff went on a visit to Moscow, and he had a talk with Vladimir Putin. And during that talk, they both sides kind of lightly agreed to the potential of a meeting to occur within the coming weeks after that talk. So it kind of seemed at the time that this was like maybe a possibility, but from the United States side, it was like this is going to happen, and it did. It ended up being in the works over the following days, and occurred just yesterday. So it's important to go over before we get into the what exactly happened during this meeting. It's important to go over the state of the war. So if we look at the state of play on the war between Ukraine and Russia, Russia is winning the war right now. And this comes as it has become a war of attrition. So what that basically means is that there is a set line basically of land that Russia has taken from Ukraine. It includes a bunch of provinces on the east of Ukraine, and that line is kind of stuck where it is right now. But as this is happening, Ukraine is losing lots of men by the day. And if you talk to anyone on the ground, I would advise everyone to go look up different people who are blogging from the war, from on the ground at the war. And they all are kind of saying the similar thing, which is Russia is winning the war because the Ukrainian front line looks like Swiss cheese, they say. And that's because there's basically a bunch of holes along the Ukrainian front line because they don't have the men to have people guarding the entire front line. Basically, a lot of big chunks of the front line are guarded by either landmines or drones. And this is essentially creating the conditions to where in the coming weeks and months, it's very possible that the Ukrainian front line is just going to collapse. And this will lead to the Russian troops essentially booking it for the Dnieper River. And at that point, it's basically too late. And that's kind of the war. It's basically over. And that will be a disaster area for Ukraine and could very well cause Russia to take more, if not all, of Ukraine. So that is why it is in the West's interests to, at this point, look for a ceasefire or some sort of peace deal. And that is why it's also difficult to imagine that Putin was ever looking to come to yesterday's meeting and make a deal. Because from their perspective, it's really convenient to now want peace when Russia starts winning the war. So let's get into kind of what happened during this meeting and see what maybe will come of this meeting. So again, if we look into this is the United States wanted this meeting because they have basically, since Donald Trump got in, been hit with the reality check that the Joe Biden maximalist position on this is not going to work and it's delusional. That is still the position of the Europeans and the Ukrainians. They have the idea that at the end of this war, Ukraine will have regained the land that Russia has taken. Some of these people are still saying that Crimea will become Ukrainian territory again, which is just delusional. These are lands that now, with barring full-blown Western military intervention, Russia is going to take these lands. And Donald Trump has hinted at this, but the United States is being hit with the reality that that is just going to have to be the case. Unless you want full-blown United States military intervention into this war, which I don't know if anyone does. Besides Lindsey Graham, maybe, but no one rational does. So let's look at the events of the day. So basically, around 3:30ish, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin arrive at the Air Force Base in Alaska, and let's just take a look. Here's the handshakes, the photos, and here they go getting into the car, which is surprising. Vladimir Putin actually got into the Beast, which is the United States presidential car, which was very shocking. That was most likely their only real alone time between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They just open the door and Putin just walks into the presidential Cadillac. So that was very interesting. But here are some of the scenes of the day.
To a ceasefire.
Mr. President, what's your message to Vladimir Putin?
Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine?
President Trump entering his vehicle there, the Beast, of course, and it looks like Vladimir Putin, I'm being told, got in with him as well, so they will share this ride together.
So then they get into the car and they drive off to the meeting site, and the meeting begins. The first session of this meeting begins, and it was originally planned to be a one-on-one meeting between just Putin and Trump and then the translators, but it ended up being a 3-on-3 because you had Trump, Putin, and then on the United States side, you had Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, and then you had two of Vladimir Putin's members of his foreign policy team as well. So it was very interesting to see who joined the president of both Russia and the United States on this trip. You had figures for Donald Trump's side, like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. You had Susie Wiles, his chief of staff. You had, of course, Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary. You had a lot of people there. And then you also, on the Russian side, had, I believe it was either 6 or 12 business representatives, which was, I think it was a pretty good sign, because those guys are the people who would have interest in a United States-Russia peace deal, because that could bring about more business deals to come and more trade and increase the trade relationship between the United States and Russia in a way that would benefit these guys. So that was interesting, and that was a little bit surprising. People were kind of reacting to that as it was happening. But of course, here is actually, I just want to show you guys the video. Oh, it was kind of funny. This was the moment that the press was kicked out of the meeting room, and you could see Putin's reaction. It was really funny. Take a look.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, press. 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 Let's go. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys.
Come on, guys. Let's go. Let's go.
Thank you, press.
Let's go.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Let's go.
Thank you, press. 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 Thank you, press.
It doesn't seem like he's very used to the idea of a free press and everyone kind of just shouting at the leaders. So that was just a little bit funny. And then after this happened, the meeting was scheduled for 1 hour, and then they had a luncheon scheduled right after that. They ended up canceling the luncheon, and they ended up going 2 extra hours on the meeting. They went a total of 3 hours, which was from the reporting, which that was most likely a good sign, because they were saying, the people on Trump's side were saying that if it's short, that means most likely there was irreconcilable differences between the two sides. And if it went longer, that means there's some positive movements, most likely. So seems like maybe something positive there. At least they're talking, which is good. And then they went straight to the press conference right after, which was a little anticlimactic. Everyone was all hyping this up. The press rushed into the room. Everyone's getting ready with their questions. All the press have their microphones ready to ask the president a question. Both sides give their speeches. Putin went about 6 minutes. Trump was a little bit shorter than that. Both sides were kind of talking as if there had been great progress made, but they were being very vague about it. They weren't really saying what progress had been made. They were also both saying that there were a couple sticking points that they still needed to work out, but they think that they can. But overall, it was very vague. Not much really being said. No real news coming out of that, besides the fact that both countries have talked for the first time in years. But then we have them basically rushing right out after their speeches, to which everyone watching was kind of like, that's it? We were all expecting at least some questions, but no. So it was a very quick press conference, kind of just saying that we're talking and there's been some progress made. But Putin also did address something that I do want to go over. Putin said that in order to reach a peace deal, he wants to address the root causes of this war, which I think, but what he most likely meant, based on his position being unchanged throughout all of this, is things like NATO encroachment, which was very clearly a big deal in provoking this war. Things like Ukrainian membership into NATO, which to them is just a non-starter. Now, I think this is important because Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump earlier on in this administration were acknowledging this reality and said that Ukrainian NATO membership is off the table. So that's a good sign that we can agree to that, because if you put yourself in the position of the Russians, why would you want on your border a member of the Western military alliance right on your border? So that another one is being locked out of the West in terms of trade. One thing, and I think this is where Putin was coming from by bringing the businessmen along on the trip. One thing that Putin has constantly stressed is that he wants to have greater trade relationships with the West and with the United States, but he has been constantly locked out ever since the unipolar moment. Since NATO began encroaching towards Russia's border, the West has made it a point to not allow Russia to deal or become part of the world order in terms of trade, in terms of finances, a lot of this stuff. So if the United States can make some trade deals and get the West and Russia to be cooperating in some way, there's nothing really negative about that, and they should do that. And I'd hope that we can all kind of come to an agreement on that. And also, of course, he didn't cover this, but I think one of these key root causes of this is the repeated weapons shipments to Ukraine from the United States specifically and from NATO. You had, during Trump's first term, you had the Javelin missiles being shipped to Ukraine, which was an obvious provocation. We also, during Joe Biden's term, we had the maximalist position of just endless, nonstop weapons shipments to Ukraine in hopes that the Russians would eventually tire out or they'd realize that it's not worth it. But that time never came, and it just dug a deeper and deeper hole for the Ukrainians. But now we get to the question of, now what? This meeting happened. Nothing tangible really came out of this yet, but we do have some news on the next steps. So Donald Trump this morning actually announced that the Ukrainians and the Russians have agreed that they would rather a peace deal, like a permanent peace deal, to a ceasefire, which if they can both agree to that, that's a good sign. I would hope that we can get something permanent here and we can get a deal done that not only talks about this war, but also encompasses a lot of the details about maybe bringing Russia more into the fold on the world stage so this doesn't happen again. I would really hope that we can get some sort of big deal done that talks about all these things. Also, the news is that Zelensky is going to visit the White House on Monday to discuss the things that Trump and Putin had gone over and hopefully come to an agreement on a Western position at the negotiating table, which would be great. So Also, Trump says he has to make calls to NATO and the Europeans, who again are being absolutely delusional and ridiculous throughout all of this. So he has to make some calls, see what they can agree to. Hopefully, he can just get them to like snap into reality and realize that their dreams of recreating the entirety of Ukraine's original borders is not going to happen. But honestly, if they can't figure that out, then we just got to cut them off in terms of these negotiations and just deal with what we can deal with, because this is just it's just ridiculous at this point. But that is where we stand as of now, after this meeting ended, a historic meeting yesterday, and seems some progress was made. Not entirely sure what progress was made, but seems to be some, according to both sides. But yeah, so we'll see where this goes from here. I'll be sure to have you guys covered on the latest right here on the show, as long as the negotiations go on. So be sure to stay tuned, like, subscribe, turn on notifications to always stay updated on the latest, not just in this story, but in a bunch of other stories in the news. Also, be sure to go follow me on Instagram and X and Spotify to stay updated on there as well. And thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good day.